Most of the stories I cover take place in Scotland. Hauntings tied to old kirkyards, tenement flats, and windswept glens. But on occasion, a case from further afield catches my attention. Something so strange, so specific, that I feel compelled to find out more. Lately I've been diving into more poltergeist cases. Now, I love a poltergeist account. There's something so unnerving about them, so chaotic, that they feel more frightening to me. More frightening anyway than a traditional haunting. A poltergeist feels like it doesn't seem to follow rules. They escalate, and often they seem less like a ghost, and more like some raw emotional energy that's found a way to lash out. The Rerick case in Kirkcudbright, one of the darkest I've covered, really stayed with me. And my son's been volunteering in Canada for the past few months, so naturally I've been drawn to some of the stories from over there. I soon found myself digging into some of the country's older ghost accounts, and that's when I stumbled across this one. A farmhouse in rural Quebec, fires with no cause, flying stones, and a voice loud, intelligent, uninvited, that claimed to be the devil. I'll always return to Scotland, and Edinburgh will always be my home, but now and then, I hope you won't mind me indulging in a story that reaches a little further afield. After the failed Jacobite risings, many Highlanders found themselves exiled or starting over across the Atlantic. Some of them ended up in Quebec, bringing with them old traditions, strong beliefs, and stories they didn't always speak aloud. In the wake of Culloden, the Highlands were no longer safe for many who'd fought or supported the Stuart cause. Some fled by choice, others were transported. While Nova Scotia took in large numbers, Quebec also saw Scottish settlers, merchants, soldiers, and displaced clansmen, particularly after the British took the province from the French in 1759. These were people shaped by hardship, superstition, and a culture where the unseen world was never far from daily life. Belief in second sight, in fairies, in restless spirits, and pacts with the devil. These weren't quite folk tales to them. They were part of the fabric of life, passed down quietly in stories told by firelight. By the late 1800s, many of these beliefs had faded from public view. But in rural areas, especially in tight-knit farming communities like Clarendon, older fears could still resurface when something strange occurred. Now, it's impossible to say whether the events at the Dagg farmhouse were connected to that inheritance, but when a voice began to speak, claiming to be the devil, in a place once settled by exiled Scots, it's worth considering what cultural shadows may have remained, and how belief, place, and fear can intertwine. In the late summer of 1889, strange events began to unfold at a remote farmhouse in rural Quebec. The family who lived there, George and Susan Dagg, their children, and an 11-year-old orphan girl named Dinah, found themselves at the centre of something they couldn't explain. At first, as is common with such cases, it was just small things. A knock or a bang with no apparent source. The sound of footsteps when no one was there. But soon fires began breaking out with no cause. Stones were hurled through windows by unseen hands. Household items flew across rooms, and then a voice began to speak. It wasn't a muffled whisper or a voice in someone's head. It was heard aloud, deep, gravelly, and aware. It claimed to know secrets. It insulted guests. It answered questions, and more than once, it told those listening it was the devil. What followed was one of the strangest and most controversial hauntings ever documented in Canada's history. Eyewitnesses signed statements. A well-known artist and spiritualist, Percy Woodcock, came to investigate, and ended up in a 5-hour conversation with the entity. Was it all a hoax? A case of ventriloquism and manipulation? or something darker? This is the story of the Dagg Poltergeist, an extraordinary haunting that brought fire, voices, and fear to a quiet farmhouse in Clarendon, and one that left even the skeptics unsure. The disturbances at the Dagg farmhouse began as they normally do in poltergeist cases, quietly. On the night of the 15th of September 1889, the Dagg family noticed odd, unexplainable sounds, knocks on walls, faint bangs from empty rooms, and then the creak of floorboards when everyone was still. At first, they put it down to the house settling, or possibly animals outside. Clarendon was quiet, rural, and life on the farm didn't leave much time for ghost stories. But the noises didn't stop. They grew louder, more deliberate, and within days things took a far more dangerous turn. One night, a water jug slid across the kitchen table by itself, as if pushed by an unseen hand, before abruptly coming to a stop. Later that week, a shelf holding crockery tipped and fell without warning, not from imbalance or weight, but as if it had been shoved upwards from beneath. Then the sounds began to change. A knock would come from inside the walls, then an answer, 2 knocks, 3, rhythmic, intentional. It was no longer just noise. Something, or someone, was there. And then, on a single day, 8 fires broke out around the property. 6 inside the house, 2 outside, curtains caught alight while still hanging, all of it witnessed in daylight, with neighbours present. Whatever this was, it wasn't subtle, and it wasn't going away. The events were so extreme and so widely witnessed that a formal statement was drawn up. The language is simple, matter of fact, but what it describes is anything but.
A statement signed by 17 residents of the neighborhood. Is it a devil from below or an angel from above? Cock and bull yarns. The Brockville Times of Saturday publishes 5 columns regarding the Clarendon front spook in Pontiac County, apropos of a visit paid to the scene by Mr. Percy Woodcock, the sculptor and member of the Royal Canadian Academy of Art. For 2 months past, there has been a lot of excitement around Shawville and Portage du Fort on the subject of the spook. On the 15th of September, last the family of George Dagg, a farmer living in the township of Clarendon, 7 miles from the above village, near the line of the Pontiac and Pacific Railroad, was disturbed by strange and seemingly supernatural manifestations in their household and about the nearby district. The family consisted of George Dagg, his wife and 2 young children, also an adopted girl about 11 years old, little Johnny Dagg, aged 2 years, and Dinah Budden Mead, a girl from Scotland by Mr. Quarrier, and was then residing in the Belleville district, wanted to convince the unbelievers. Mr. Woodcock then, about 2 a.m., went home with Mr. Arthur Smart and remained the balance of the night, returning to Dagg's with Mr. Smart and some of his family on Sunday at an early hour. All day on Sunday the house was crowded with visitors from all parts of the surrounding country. From early in the Voice, which apparently was in good behavior as it had been promised, answered the questions of everybody and commented on the different persons who inspected the house. Some of his remarks were very amusing and displayed an intimate knowledge of the private affairs of many of his questioners. During the forenoon, some persons spoke to the Voice and remarked on his using any obscene language as on other occasions. He repented. "I am not that person who used that language. I am the person who was sent by God to drive away that fellow." And this character he assumed throughout the day.
That description was signed and attested to by 17 witnesses. And still, it wasn't the strangest part of the case. Because this wasn't just an apparition or a series of unexplained noises, this was a haunting that spoke. Not through a medium, not whispered in someone's ear, but aloud, clearly, forcefully, and in a voice that clearly didn't belong to anyone in the house. The first time it was heard, it came from somewhere inside the walls. It was deep and gravelly, like the voice of an old man, and it answered questions put to it aloud. It claimed to know what was happening in the house and the lives of neighbours. It commented on the people present and mocked those who didn't believe in it. Its first words were,
"I am the devil, the son of the blessed."
But the identity wasn't fixed. Like many poltergeist cases, there was a trickster quality to what was happening, a shifting personality. Sometimes it claimed to be a spirit who had died 20 years before. Other times it insisted it was an angel sent by God to drive away evil. It changed tone as often as it changed shape, crude one moment, almost religious the next. Soon, word of the case spread beyond Clarendon, and curious visitors began arriving at the Dagg home. Among them was Percy Woodcock. He'd already been involved in the case from a distance, helping to draft the formal witness statement based on what locals had reported. But by November 1889, he wanted to see the situation for himself. Woodcock arrived expecting a hoax, or at best a case of hysteria. Instead, he found himself in direct conversation with something he couldn't explain. He was sitting near the stove, taking notes, when the voice addressed him directly.
"You are a stranger here. You are from Brockville."
What it said was true. He was from Brockville. Then it added,
"I'll follow you to your home and frighten you and your wife."
"You might frighten me, but you cannot frighten my wife." The spirit then laughed.
"We'll see about that. Tell me your name."
Woodcock naturally refused. There was a pause, then more words from nowhere.
"You came to catch me out. You think you're clever."
What frightened him the most wasn't just the voice's boldness. It was that it seemed to know things about his private life. Private things. Details no one in that room should have known. It mocked him, needled him, and then changed tone entirely.
"I'm not the one who used foul language. I've come to drive him out. I was sent by God."
The contradictions were constant. Woodcock stayed for several days, speaking with the voice and taking notes. One night, the entity spoke to him for 5 hours straight. "Why are you tormenting this family?" Woodcock asked.
"It's only mischief. I don't mean real harm. I hate the girl. And you."
"Then stop."
"I can't. I won't."
It even went as far as to be asked for forgiveness.
"Forgive me, Mr. Woodcock."
But Woodcock didn't. He couldn't. Something didn't sit right. And when the conversation ended, the voice didn't disappear. It only shifted again. Throughout all of this, the pattern continued. The voice was always strongest when Dinah was in the room. When she left, the disturbances died down. When she returned, they resumed. It wasn't proof of anything, but it was hard to ignore. At times the spirit called for hymns to be sung. At others it raged when prayers were said. To those who heard it, it wasn't a trick or a child's game. This was a voice that answered, argued, threatened, and confessed. And it wasn't done yet. The voice wasn't the only part of the haunting that worsened. As the disturbances grew more intense, they seemed to fixate more and more on Dinah, the 11-year-old orphan at the centre of the case. Everyone in the house was affected by the phenomena, but Dinah bore the brunt of it. One day, she screamed out in pain. Something had pulled her hair. When Susan Dagg rushed to help, she found Dinah's braid had been nearly severed, as if someone had taken a knife to it. Another time, Dinah cried out from the children's room. Something terrifying, she said, was pulling the bedclothes away. A tall black thing, as she described it. George's mother, Mary Dagg, was cleaning nearby and came running, just in time to see the sheets floating in midair, as if held up by invisible hands. "There," Dinah shouted, "he's jumping over the bedstead." Mary Dagg, unable to see, handed Dinah a bullwhip. "Strike him, child," she said. "Take courage and strike him hard." Dinah swung at the empty air, urged on by family and a neighbouring farmer, Arthur Smart, who had entered during the commotion. "Lay it on him, Dinah," he called out. As the whip cracked through the air, everyone in the room heard a loud squealing noise, like a pig in pain. After the noise had stopped, Dinah said the black figure had vanished. But if it had left, it didn't stay away for long. In the days that followed, the haunting ramped up. Beds were torn apart by unseen hands, harmonicas played by themselves, rocking chairs jolted to life, visitors were pelted with potatoes, and then came the message. A sheet of paper was found pinned to the wall, written in rough script. "You gave me 15 cuts," it read. For many, that moment marked a change, from chaotic haunting to something darker, more deliberate. The Dagg family turned to their local minister, Reverend Horner, who attempted to read scripture aloud in the home. But as he prayed, the book he was reading from disappeared from his hands. They found it minutes later, inside the oven. Horner dropped to his knees and prayed for God to lift his heavy hand from the house. When that failed, George Dagg travelled around 170 kilometres to the southeast to visit a renowned folk healer known as the Witch of Plum Hollow. She listened carefully, held a séance, and then gave her answer. The cause, she said, was black magic. A local widow and her 2 children had cast spells against Dinah, and the only neighbour who matched that description was Mrs. Wallace, who firmly denied it, and still made a point of visiting the Daggs to prove she meant no harm. By now the story had spread well beyond the county. Reporters travelled by carriage, interviewing the family, the neighbours, and even random passers-by who claimed to have witnessed something. One man, James Quinn, told a journalist that his halter had vanished from the doorstep while he was inside chatting. Moments later it fell out the sky in front of the house. And then came the most frightening vision yet. 5-year-old Mary Dagg saw a creature standing in the doorway. It had the body of a man, the legs of a beast, and the head of a bull. It smiled at her and asked,
"Want to come to hell with me?"
She wasn't the only one who saw it. Dinah later described the same thing, alongside sightings of a giant black dog with red eyes, lurking just outside the house. The adults couldn't see the figures, but they could hear the voice. They saw the destruction, and they couldn't explain any of it. Word of the haunting spread fast. By late November, the Dagg farmhouse wasn't just a private place of fear. It had become a spectacle. Visitors came from across the region, farmers, merchants, even clergymen, hoping to witness the strange events for themselves. Some came out of curiosity, others came to pray. On Sundays the house was packed wall to wall, and the voice, whoever or whatever it was, seemed to enjoy the attention. It spoke more freely, it commented on visitors, it made jokes, it answered questions, and then it would shift tone again, as if trying on different personalities. One visitor, a clergyman named Mr. Bell, tried to take control of the situation with prayer. It didn't go well.
Please, don't sing. It hurts me.
But, like a true trickster poltergeist, when the hymn stopped, it changed its mind.
Sing more. I like it.
Mr. Bell opened his Bible. As he read, the voice began to laugh, a harsh, hyena-like sound that echoed through the small house. When he led a prayer, the voice interrupted again, mocking and roaring with laughter.
Go on. Say amen. Say it now.
The clergyman, shaken, closed his book. He left the house without finishing the prayer, and he never returned. Other visitors reported similar contradictions. A spirit that quoted scripture one moment, then used foul language the next. Some believed it, others thought it was a hoax. But no one could quite explain how it was happening, or why the voice seemed to know so much. The story had gone from a rural disturbance to a public spectacle, and now it was making the headlines. One of the most detailed reports appeared in the Brockville Times, a 5-column spread titled Dagg's Demon, The Doings and Sayings of the Pontiac Spook. It focused on the experiences of Percy Woodcock, the artist who'd spent days in the house, speaking with the entity and documenting the chaos. The subheading asked a question that still hasn't been answered. Is it a devil from below or an angel from above? The following account comes from the Brockville Times, published in late November 1889. It details the experiences of Percy Woodcock during his time at the Dagg farmhouse.
A statement signed by 17 residents of the neighborhood. Is it a devil from below or an angel from above? Cocks and bull yarns. The Brockville Times of Saturday publishes 5 columns regarding the Clarendon front spook in Pontiac County, apropos of a visit paid to the scene by Mr. Percy Woodcock, the sculptor and member of the Royal Canadian Academy of Art. For 2 months past, there has been a lot of excitement around Shawville and Portage du Fort on the subject of the spook. On the 15th of September, last the family of George Dagg, a farmer living in the township of Clarendon, 7 miles from the above village, near the line of the Pontiac and Pacific Railroad, was disturbed by strange and seemingly supernatural manifestations in their household and about the nearby district. The family consisted of George Dagg, his wife, and 2 young children, also an adopted girl about 11 years old, little Johnny Dagg, aged 2 years, and Dinah Budden Mead, a girl from Scotland, by Mr. Quarrier, and was then residing in the Belleville district. They wanted to convince the unbelievers. Mr. Woodcock then, about 2 a.m., went home with Mr. Arthur Smart, and remained the balance of the night, returning to Dagg's with Mr. Smart and some of his family on Sunday at an early hour. All day on Sunday, the house was crowded with visitors from all parts of the surrounding country. From early in the voice, which apparently was in good behavior, as it had been promised, answered the questions of everybody and commented on the different persons who inspected the house. Some of his remarks were very amusing and displayed an intimate knowledge of the private affairs of many of his questioners. During the forenoon, some person spoke to the voice and remarked on his using any obscene language, as on other occasions he repented. "I am not that person who used that language. I am the person who was sent by God to drive away that fellow." And this character he assumed throughout the day. The county papers have been full of recital of the alleged strange occurrences in the Dagg's house. Strange voices are said to have been heard in the house. Fire is said to have suddenly broken out in many places, things strewn about the house by unseen hands. Window panes were smashed, stones were thrown up the open door, the children's hair was mysteriously cut, etc. It was noticed that when the little girl, Dinah, was away from the house, the trouble did not occur. She was closely watched, but nothing could be discovered, and the people came to the conclusion that spirits were at work. Mr. Woodcock, who is well known as an artist in Ottawa, heard of the matter at his home in Brockville. And as he has an innate wonder in spiritualism, he decided to investigate for himself. On Thursday, November 14, he accordingly started for Clarendon. He departed from Brockville Thursday night at 8:30 and made careful inquiries among the neighbours about the occurrences previous to his arrival, and made careful and copious notes during his visit. From these, the Brockville Times furnishes its lengthy account. One instance is stated in which Mr. Woodcock heard many strange things and had long talks with the spook, as he says. But he saw nothing strange during his 3 days' visit, except, as claimed, he heard himself writing of its own accord. With this preliminary, the following account is given just as published in the Brockville Times. Mr. Woodcock arrived in Shawville on Thursday evening, 14th, and the next morning procured a rig and drove to the Dagg farmhouse. He found it is a good warm district surrounded for the most part with ordinarily well-to-do farmers. He was cordially welcomed by Mr. Dagg and was spoke to be a small log house of 1 story and attic where he was placed in a room upstairs. He found the Daggs to be a very decent, respectable, honest family of good average intelligence. Mr. Woodcock was received by them on his arrival as an ordinary curiosity seeker, of whom they had already had abundance, but after some conversation, Mr. Dagg said they expected to take quiet day, as they had sent Dinah, the little girl, over to Dagg's father's house about 2 miles away, and when she was gone, the manifestations ceased. Mr. Woodcock, however, was not to be put off with this, and finally succeeded in securing their confidence so as to induce them to promise to send for the little girl the following day. On Saturday morning, when he arrived at the house, he was met by the children outside. The little girl was inside. He asked her if she had seen anything since she came back last night. She replied that she had, for she had been pushed from the bed. He was at once admitted to the room. Mr. Woodcock walked around and examined the premises, but without noting anything unusual. He states that he then took his seat quietly near the stove. At once a voice announced in deep, gruff tones, "I am the devil. I am the devil." Mr. Woodcock, however, instantly replied in language which he had made ready beforehand, "If you are the devil, prove it to me." The voice at once said, "Who are you?" "I am a friend of Mr. Dagg's." "Do you live here?" "No." "You came to try and catch me in some way." He refused to speak more for some time. Mr. Woodcock says the voice then commenced to converse quite freely, and the first statement made was, "You are a stranger here, and you are from Brockville." This was correct. Then it said, "I'll follow you to your home and frighten you and your wife." "You might frighten me," answered Mr. Woodcock, "but you cannot frighten my wife." The spirit laughed and said he would try. He then asked Mr. Woodcock his wife's name, which he refused to give. The spirit then made several references to persons or matters it is not probable anyone in the house or vicinity could know unless they had corresponded with Brockville. Mr. Woodcock derives names. First, that fires have broken out spontaneously through the house, as many as 8 occurring on one day, 6 being in the house and 2 outside. that the window curtains were burned whilst on the windows in the family bedroom, whilst the family and neighbours were in the house. Second, that stones were thrown by invisible hands, that articles such as water jug, milk pitcher, a wash basin, cream jug, butter tub, and other articles were thrown about the house by the same invisible agency, a jar of water being thrown in the face of Mrs. John Dagg, also in the face of Mrs. George Dagg, whilst they were busy about their household duties. Mrs. George Dagg being alone in the house at the time it was thrown in her face, this having occurred more than a month ago. That a large shelf was heard, distinctly to be played, and was seen to move across the room onto the floor. Immediately after this, a small rocking chair began rocking furiously. This washboard was sent flying down the stairs from the garret, no one being in the garret at the time. When Dinah is present in the house, a deep, gruff voice like that of an aged man has been heard, and when asked questions, answered so as to be distinctly heard, showing that he is cognizant of all that has taken place, not only in Mr. Dagg's family, but also in the families of the surrounding neighborhood, that he claims to be a discarnated being who died 20 years ago, aged 80, that he gave his name to Mr. George Dagg and Mr. Willie Dagg, forbidding them to tell it, that this intelligence is able to make himself visible to Dinah and little Mary and Johnny, who have seen him under different forms at different times, at one time as a tall, thin man with a cow's head and tail and cloven foot, at another time as a big black dog, and finally as a man with a beautiful face and long white hair, dressed in white, wearing a crown with stars in it. Mr. Woodcock left the house about 12:30 Monday night. The occurrences after this date are given on the authority of the Daggs, also Mary Smart, niece, and Benjamin Smart, and others in attendance. A conversation then ensued between Mr. Woodcock, the voice, and Mr. George Dagg, who afterwards joined them, lasting for 5 hours without a break. Mr. Woodcock was in the position that he had to deal with an invisible personality, as real as though there in the flesh, and on this basis endeavored to shame him into better behavior and stop persecuting the Daggs who had admitted doing him, the voice, no harm. On the other hand, the voice resisted for a long time, but finally seemed to yield to the expostulations of Mr. Woodcock. Said Mr. Dagg had agreed to cease the use of obscene language, and finally admitted that it had been adopted solely by a spirit of mischief, of having to say it, it termed it, and had no ill will against anybody except Mr. Woodcock and the girl Dinah, to whom he seemed to have a decided antipathy. He asked to be forgiven by Mr. Woodcock, but no offer of forgiveness was made by him whom he had so slandered. The substance of the conversation bore on moral and spiritual matters, and Mr. Woodcock especially dwelt upon the advantage of being good, particularly as to whether spirits could suffer reward or punishment, and further the voice was very gruff and coarse, entirely different to hers, which is delicate and very effeminate. To make assurance doubly sure, he asked Dinah to fill the cup with water, which she did, and the conversation continued the same as before. Immediately after this, Mr. Woodcock went into the house, and the voice was heard there. The following conversation then took place. Mr. Woodcock: what are your reasons for thus persecuting the Dagg family? Answer: Mrs. Wallace sends me. Mrs. Wallace is a friend with whom the Daggs are not on good terms. Mr. W., will your engagement with Mrs. What goes on? Answer: won't tell you. Shut up, you meddle with the black art. I will break your clock, for I'm the devil, the son of the blessed. Mr. W.: no, you won't, sir. I am not your enemy. Answer me civilly. I am not your enemy. Answer. The reply to this was so obscene as to be unfit for publication. Mr. W.: now, spirit, be a decent fellow and use better language, please. Answer: I will, but you keep me here talking all the time. I'm tired. Go on, Mr. Woodcock, and shake hands with Mrs. Dagg crying and awaiting for you, she and the baby. Mr. W. I will not. Voice. No, you won't. You say, you will, and then you won't. Mr. W. What are your grievances, referring to the reasons for the visit? I'll talk to you, not argue with you. Mr. Woodcock returned to Dagg's house on Monday morning to say goodbye to them before leaving for home, and spent a few hours arranging his notes and comparing them with the recollections of the Daggs and other members of the family. It will be remembered that the voice had on one occasion refused to respond to Mr. Woodcock's good night and speak to the children. Mr. Woodcock asked the girl to again play and sing, and it was done with little effort. The children then said, "He's cursed and came through the house," and he'd give up. They imagined the same man, boy or child, had spoken like a little man, boy or child. Mr. Woodcock is to be commended for his courage, tact, and patience. They rushed to hear what had been said and eagerly wrote it down. The incident of the baby, Johnny, is like that in which the baby was in the fire following, and the spirit played on the music thing he had. Dinah said she distinctly saw him stoop and lift Mary and Johnny in his arms, and heard him speak to Johnny. Dinah said he spoke to her also, and said that Woodcock thought he was not an angel, but he would show that he was, and then she said he went up to heaven. Whether this visitation has ceased for good remains to be seen, but on reappearance, Mr. Dagg agreed to at once notify Mr. Woodcock when the little girl Dinah will be brought here, Brockville, and taken into Mr. Woodcock's family. So far, no word has reached here of any further disturbance.
In the end, there was no final confrontation, no exorcism, no confession. Just a slow, quiet fading. After months of chaos, fires, voices, flying stones, the disturbances came to a stop. And the pattern by then was hard to ignore. When Dinah was sent away, the voice went silent. She was removed from the Dagg household and placed in the care of an orphanage. Some people believed that Percy Woodcock intended to take her in himself, but if he did, nothing more was reported. The farmhouse returned to normal, the visitors stopped coming, and the newspapers moved on. And the spirit, or whatever it had been, never spoke again. For some, this was all the proof they needed. The Equity newspaper called the whole thing a disgrace, a fraud that had made fools of the community. They blamed the Dagg family, they blamed Dinah, and they said the matter should be put to rest. But no one ever truly explained what happened. No one proved how the voice was produced, or how it knew what it knew. And those who were there, those who signed their names to the original account, never retracted a word. It simply ended. The Dagg haunting doesn't sit comfortably in a single category. It has all the markers of a classic poltergeist case. Objects thrown, fires breaking out, a young girl at the centre. But the case goes further than most. It spoke. It was seen. It reasoned. It supposedly sang hymns. It mocked visitors and claimed to be the devil. And then it vanished. I've covered other poltergeist cases before, like Rerrick in Scotland, where strange rapping sounds, fires and flying objects plagued a family in 1695. That case too featured something rare, a voice, an unseen speaker that mocked, answered, and claimed knowledge of things it shouldn't have known. And then there's the workshop poltergeist, which I wrote about in Hidden Haunts England. It began with a kitchen table lifting on its own, and ended with a storm of flying objects. Cutlery, coal, even a basin that rose, turned in mid-air and then smashed into the ceiling. A police constable witnessed it, so did neighbours. And at the centre of it all was a child named Eliza Rose. There was no voice in workshop, no threats or riddles, just a silent, escalating force that threw the house into chaos. And when Eliza left, it stopped. Just like Dinah. In both cases, the activity built around a single child, and in both, once that child was removed from the house, the disturbances vanished without explanation. And it's a pattern that repeats. In more modern cases, Enfield, South Shields and others, you see the same cycle unfold. Escalation, reaction, performance, something watching, something responding, something that seems to know it's being observed. As I've mentioned, I've always found poltergeist cases the most unnerving. They're so chaotic, so unpredictable, that they seem to strip away the usual boundaries between belief and fear. But other, more structured minds have tried to make sense of that chaos. Edinburgh-based parapsychologist Evelyn Hollow describes poltergeist phenomena unfolding in 7 distinct stages. It starts with a presence, feelings of unease or cold spots, then moves to noises, scratches, knocks, footsteps. What seems harmless at first can escalate quickly. Objects begin to move, then vanish or appear in impossible places. That's the tipping point, from the rational to the truly inexplicable. What follows is destruction, smashed objects, thrown furniture, bursts of violent energy. Then in some cases comes communication, knocks, words, messages. The final stage, she says, is the most dangerous. Threats to life, bites, scratches, injuries. At that point, belief becomes irrelevant, because the danger is physical and immediate. This framework captures the arc of a poltergeist haunting, from subtle beginnings to full-blown disruption, and gives shape to something that so often feels formless. It's this ambiguity, this dance between rationality and the impossible, that keeps the mystery alive for me. And the Dagg case fits it almost exactly. From the first signs of presence, cold spots, knocks and unease, to full-blown destruction, and finally direct communication. If Evelyn Hollow's 7 stages map the anatomy of a poltergeist case, Dagg runs right through the heart of it. It doesn't offer answers, just questions that are harder to ignore than most. What it leaves us with is testimony, signatures, voices on the record, and the silence that followed. Because whatever it was, it spoke, and those who heard it never forgot.